Is climate change responsible for the LA fires? Was it a good idea for President Trump to take us out of the Paris Climate Agreement? Stay tuned for one of the world's foremost experts and best-selling authors on the ongoing climate debate that affects all of us in many ways, real and imagined. Joining us to answer these questions is none other than Marc Morano of Climate Depot. That's climatedepot.org. Welcome to Real Science Radio, Mr. Morano.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. Happy to be here. It's climatedepot.com.
.com. Gotcha. Climatedepot.com. Thank you.
Yes, I should have caught that, Mr. Morano, because I've used your material for years. Just a fountainhead of good climate information at climatedepot.com. Amazing. So glad to have you on.
Thank you.
By the way, Mr. Morano has appeared on numerous TV shows, including Fox News, CNN, if that's worth mentioning. He was with Bill Nye, the fake science guy. And so, Marc, is climate change responsible for the fires in Los Angeles?
Wow, great question. If you ask Governor Newsom, absolutely. He wants to blame this all on climate change. If you ask the mayor of Los Angeles, absolutely. But here's the thing. If you look at even the United Nations is forced to concede. Even the National Climate Assessment under Joe Biden's administration was forced to concede that extreme weather events, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, droughts, are either no trend or declining trends on climate timescales of 30, 50, 100 years. So you can always find an extreme weather event if you say like Southwest California or, the coast of Florida or this region of Australia. Your chance of winning the lottery, very low. The chance of someone somewhere winning the lottery is very high. So what the media does is with all the extreme weather, including wildfires, shows it all like it's happening unprecedented. We've never seen it. All nonsense. The same way if you believe everyone, more people are winning the lottery and everyone's winning and you can see the winners, they're featured on TV and look at this, we're covering it. In the case of wildfires, among all the extreme weather events I mentioned, they're probably the least climate influenced. And what I mean by that is they are the most human policy influenced in terms of the ground. And I'll get to that in a second. But before I get to just that influence of wildfires, is that wildfires themselves are in these UN and all these reports with the extreme weather events, wildfires are down dramatically over the last 100 years. You can go back to the 1920s, and this is both globally and in the United States. Precipitous drop, like 80% drop in the incidence and severity. One thing we've learned to do is deal with wildfires as we've developed. Now, what happened in California, in general with wildfires, you're dealing with land use, water diversion, trees, forestry practices, shrub management, emergency response, training of emergency response, early warning systems. Nothing I just mentioned has to do with climate change. So what happened in California, and we have it documented now, 45 minutes delay for the first fire, which was crucial.
Hello.
We have now the top U.S. Geological Survey scientist came out 2 weeks ago and said this is not a climate change fire, and there was actually citing a study from 2001 showing that almost 100% of the fires are started by humans. So this was not sparked by lightning, and also California had record precipitation in recent days. So the idea that it was all dried out and just ready to go isn't accurate either. So that's the situation. This is not a climate change fire. It is a man-made disaster, and it's man-made by misplaced priorities of California. Water diversions, blowing up dams, worried about endangered species, trying to return California to a Garden of Eden. We're not going to develop any of these lands. We're going to keep them pristine and pre-human settlement. Well, you have a lot of human settlement, and what happens is you end up screwing the humans there.
That's so true. And we have there are too many humans settling outside of houses in California. The homeless is a huge problem. And just to prove the point that you just made, in San Diego County just a couple days ago, 3 fires broke out in the middle of the night. Winds were up in the 60 to 100 mile an hour range. But the firemen put the fires out immediately because San Diego County is not Los Angeles.
I was in San Diego, and that was actually non-woke run, and there was no homeless people. I had a friend, I think it was Santa Monica or somewhere just recently, and they're like, God, I don't understand the big deal about California. The city was, there were no homeless, there was no graffiti, there was no drug use, there was no one. So I said, what city was it? I looked it up. Now, I don't want to get partisan here, but it's just the idea it's not a woke Democrat. The entire city council was 100% Republican. The mayor was 100% Republican. And I had people marveling like, well, California's not as bad as I heard. This city was beautiful. You know, it really is a mind virus, this idea of wokeness. And it's not necessarily all Democrats. You have people like Michael Schellenberger, who ran for governor. He was a former Democrat. I mean, it's not, I'm not making this partisan. It is an ideology, though.
Yes, it's running sane people versus insane people. It makes a big difference. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, you know, maybe people do cause climate change. You know, wasn't there a Democratic donor that started the Yosemite fire a couple years ago?
That's right. That was yes, and that was a whole thing they tried to blame on that. It turned out these are a lot of them are budding eco-terrorists. A lot of them are homeless that start these fires, and you have careless campers and hikers and that as well. But this is just it's maddening to try to link any kind of climate change. There's so many scientists. I have a whole section of a chapter in my book, Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, just on wildfires. There's no there. And it's amazing to see how desperate they are to blame this on climate change. Justin Trudeau did the same thing when they had the Canadian wildfires in 2003. One thing to understand about California is, and this was in the San Jose Mercury News a couple years ago, California droughts, which they always say unprecedented droughts. No, global droughts, no trend, declining trend. Centuries ago, 200-300 years ago, California had droughts much, much worse than anything we're experiencing today. So if you just look at anything from a geological perspective, if you go back to the first United Nations climate report, the medieval warm period was much warmer than current temperatures. And there was actually a systematic campaign. I worked for the U.S. Senate Environment Public Works Committee. We had a scientist come testify that back in the 1990s, they said UN scientists reached out to each other and said, we have to get rid of the medieval warm period. How can we sell a climate crisis when it was warmer without SUVs and coal plants? And lo and behold, by 2001, they literally went back and erased the past. Now, and they made it so that the medieval warm period was erased, and now you just had a flat line, and suddenly the 20th century, because of mankind's SUVs and our appliances, that we went through the roof. This is how they play the game. And think of it like an accounting firm accused of financial fraud. They go, no. Believe me, we don't need anyone to go to jail. We're not going to dissolve. We hired a new accountant. We redid all the books. We have record profits now. We're doing great. No problem here. Nothing to see. Move along. That's what the UN did with temperature data.
Oh, well, and you know, that brings to mind a question I wanted to ask. How is it that 2024 is being sold as the warmest year ever?
I have a whole chapter in my book on that. I worked in the U.S. Senate. We dealt with all this firsthand. This is statistical bullshit. Now, just think for a second. Remember COVID, the case counts? They wanted to get everyone tested, and they had all these ridiculous tests that even if you had no symptoms, somehow you were positive. And they had, of course, the death rate if you died. We had coroners testifying from Colorado that motorcycle gunshot accident victims were listed as dying from COVID. The same kind of statistics where they then tie that to mask mandates and lockdowns. We had one professor who actually said it brilliantly. Tying COVID lockdowns or mask mandates to COVID case counts is similar to tying them to phases of the moon. There's just no there. Well, what they've done in the same topic with the global average temperature, it's based on, in part, thermometer data, but in part on thermostats that don't exist and filling in the gaps and the statistical averaging, which sort of smooths everything out, and they can literally adjust as they want to. Before I answer directly, I just wanted to say with this temperature data, thermometers didn't come online basically until 1870, 1880. When was that? Historically speaking, that was at the end of the Little Ice Age when the New York Harbor was frozen over, the Thames River was frozen over, we had brutal cold. So thermometers coincidentally went online with a warm-up since the end of the Little Ice Age. So that's an important point to make. What they've done, and they began this around 2005, 2006, around the time of Al Gore's film and the UN report and the whole cap and trade and all that stuff is all weaponized. They've claimed that we've had the hottest year on record. Then we went for like 18 and a half years with no warming whatsoever. according to the data, and that freaked him out. So what did they do then? They did the same thing the UN did. They went back and adjusted the data and said, yeah, global warming pause no longer exists. What they've done with these hottest year declarations, they claim hottest year from year to year difference of hundredths of a degree Fahrenheit. That is within the margin of error for adjustments of tenths of a degree. It's a political way of saying basically the temperature hasn't changed much at all, but we're going to highlight these imperceptible statistical differences and claim it's an unprecedented climate emergency. It's bull. Even the head of NASA, James Hansen, at one point said, these aren't really particularly important, but scientifically, but they're important politically because the idea is they time them as well to these UN summits. And I just got back in November from Baku, Azerbaijan to the United Nations Climate Summit. 23 hours of traveling, by the way, to go. There's only about 4 dissenters there, 4 climate skeptics bothered to even show up.
Did they cancel your carbon credit card? Did they cut you off?
Yeah, they actually, what they were doing was the first day of the conference, multiple speakers featured calling for the end of meat consumption, global meat taxes. So I did a series of videos that went viral at the UN summit. In the restaurants and food court, they were serving hot dogs, chickens, beef, and the lines were huge. They had a vegan booth, and there were 2 people in it, this huge empty booth. So they weren't even following their own advice about the meat consumption.
And that's real. That's real reporting, Mr. Morano. I saw that. That was brilliant. That was
on the
well
ground.
done.
Yeah, I was able to. I've been to 21 out of the last 23 of these UN summits, and I'm going. This year is going to be in Belém, Brazil, which is in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. So I may have to get some bug spray. Again, I've been there before for different conferences, and I've done an Amazon documentary. Amazon pre-climate change was the exact same thing. 90% of the forest was intact. They claimed using computer models and all this nonsense, X amount of football fields a minute are disappearing from the Amazon. It's going to disappear. They had all the footage of like bulldozers and the sad animals. I interviewed the environmentalist down there who threw down the travel book saying, bull, this is back in the 90s. Bull, that's not happening. And it turns out by 2005, the Sting Rainforest concerts stopped with all the Hollywood celebrities. It's actually where I first met and interviewed Donald Trump, was at a Sting Rainforest concert in either 98 or 99. He just went as a New York figure that wasn't really involved in the issue, but he just showed up and I interviewed him as he was walking in. But the gist of it is by 2005, the New York Times reported that the Amazon and rainforests in general were now becoming least endangered because of sustainable forestry practices. They can now log a forest, and within 5 to 7 years, you can't distinguish log forest from the original forest and plant and animal species. And because a big reason, people are leaving the jungle, moving to cities, they're going to urban areas, and so the jungle is reverting back. So that whole scare campaign that went for decades faded away and was replaced in mass by climate change.
So speaking of Trump, what's your thoughts on his withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement?
Well, interesting. It's the greatest thing he could do, but he's got to do more than he did last time. What I don't want to see is a yin-yang from Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. We can't keep doing that. So there was a way out for this. First of all, it's fantastic. You know why you know it's good? Big oil. People always say, I'm funded by big oil. My answer is, what oil company is going to want to fund me? I trash ExxonMobil. I trash all of the big ones because they're all in on the climate agenda. They all want carbon capture. They want government subsidies. Right? Just today, it was Bloomberg, I think it was Reuters, news came out. All of the big oil is upset that Trump's pulling us out of the UN Paris Agreement. Why? Because they want a seat at the table. Yeah, no, the table needs to be upended and kicked away. Not, I don't want to sit at the table. Bullshit, but this just goes to show you. You know what else big oil wants? I went to the American Petroleum Institute meeting last week just as a freak show to watch it. And people, you're an oil lobbyist. Believe me, they wouldn't give me a cent. I was actually treated rudely. People who I'd known for decades gave me like the brush off because they know I'm against their agenda. But their vice president of operations told me, well, we don't want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, the greatest boondoggle in U.S. spending history. We need surgical repeals. Why? Because they're going to suck down the government teat of carbon capture. So, and of course, when Donald Trump 1.0, his first term, had Rex Tillerson, the former Exxon CEO, first action is to go up to the Arctic and sign a UN climate declaration. He's the one that urged Trump to stay in the UN Paris Agreement back then, and Trump got out. What Trump needs to do is, he's already withdrawn formally, but he needs now to submit the UN Paris Agreement to the United States Senate as a treaty. It should be rejected, and even the Democrats will have to reject it because it's not good for America. They've never been tested. And then it gets kicked out of the system. And the next president can't just put us back in. They're going to have a Senate vote. This will get us out of the mess that the pathetic Republican president George H.W. Bush got us into in September 1992 when he flew down to the Rio Earth Summit 2 months before losing to Bill Clinton. So the Republican Party would appear green, and he signed the Rio Earth Summit Treaty, which led to the Climate Change Network, which led to sustainable development. All of this bullshit usually starts with bad Republicans, and that's kind of redundant because other than Trump, they're pretty much all bad Republicans. Sorry.
Yeah,
and don't expect anything from Speaker Johnson. He's a pathetic uniparty toady. If he wants to be the butt boy for Donald Trump and just take orders, great. We'll take him, but don't let him, if he, off any kind of a leash, he will go straight uniparty every single time.
Yes, and he's already proven that. Thank you for pointing that out.
But I don't know about replacing him because you're going to replace him with the same crap anyway. If you can control the guy, I guess he can stay. Let's put it that way.
If anyone can, probably Donald Trump can. Now, so since I remember with Obama, the seas were supposed to recede and the temperatures were supposed to decline, and somehow that did not happen. But somehow nobody blames Obama for that. Oddly enough, it still goes on. So can we expect, or let me just put it this way. Do you expect that Donald Trump actually has some sincere beliefs about the climate bamboozle and that he'll do something solid to disassemble it?
Oh, absolutely. You can go back to I think it was 1989 when he was on Oprah Winfrey. The core values of Donald Trump have always been America first, against globalism, against this idea that we are going to be, beholden to international bureaucrats. And the climate agenda just screams at Donald Trump's strengths. He does not want to be beholden to the World Health Organization, which declares climate change a existential threat, to the World Economic Forum, to the United Nations. And every action he's taking is dismantling it. I'm just looking for permanence this time. He's got to make it so that it's extremely difficult for the next president, should they be Republican or Democrat, to try to get us back into this. And that was the failing first time around in Donald Trump's first term. He just didn't go far enough. He pulled us out of UN. By the time we actually formally got out, there was like 2 weeks left, or there was like 6 weeks left in his presidency. This time, again, he's got to do stuff with permanence, and it's hard. And I like what he's doing, with trying to cut budgets, but a Republican Congress, I'd say last time around, Donald Trump had a 1/3 cut in the EPA budget. The first time he submitted it, it was dead on arrival in the Republican Congress. So the real problem Donald Trump's going to face is the uniparty. And it's Republicans and Democrats who don't want it. And I'll even go a shocking step further. And I have to be careful how I say this, but his 3 picks in climate and energy, Chris Wright, who's an awesome CEO of Liberty Energy from Colorado for Energy Department, Doug Burgum for Interior, and Lee Zeldin for EPA. All 3, under Senate questioning, caved and gave into the narrative of climate change. Climate's a problem. We need a global solution. And it was vomit inspiring. And why? Because if we're going to defeat this climate scam once and for all, you've got to be able to go to the country club. You got to be able to go to the cocktail parties. You got to be able to go to the PTA meetings. You got to be able to say it in school, at university. You got to be able to say it in the grocery store aisles. You can't pay lip service because that means you're still supporting it intellectually and morally and everything else if you're afraid to say it, which tells me not so much Chris Wright, but Doug Burgum, personal friend of Bill Gates. Bill Gates was his first campaign contribution. He's a former Microsoft executive. He's praised Bill Gates' work publicly. He's all in on net zero. He loves carbon capture for North Dakota, where he's a governor. Lee Zeldin is a very weak Republican on climate, New York Republican. He's on footage, a film, I believe it was Showtime. It's called Years of Living Dangerously, as caving into the climate activists on camera in his office and joining the Republicans' coalition Climate Solutions Club. I'm not saying they won't work out, but what I'm saying is they have not renounced their past. They're very politically expedient, and they're going along right now, and they're afraid. They're thinking of their future viability within the uniparty. That's what I say, and that worries me because that tells me right off the bat, EPA and Interior are not going to be that activist. They're going to do the very minimum, which is what you would expect among uniparty under Trump. And it brings me back to my main thesis is this is a time of great caution. We should be celebrating, and I am, but I was a volunteer in Ronald Reagan's campaign, 1980. My older brother worked on the campaign inaugural committee, and I would volunteer every Saturday doing Governor Reagan's audio clips. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Anyway, throughout the 80s, I witnessed all these are great allies of Reagan: George H.W. Bush, Bob Dole, Howard Baker. And it turned out none of them were conservative. None of them were like Ronald Reagan. They all proved themselves to be establishment uniparty members. We are witnessing potentially that now. I've already mentioned 3 cabinet members, but I'll even go so far as to say J.D. Vance has to be watched. 5 years ago, he was all in on the climate scam. He was all in on solar wind subsidies. He called Donald Trump Hitler not that long ago. Now, hey, he's all with it because it's popular and it raises money and everyone's happy. Vivek Ramaswamy, same way. I don't know if I trust him. Elon Musk, I've never really trusted, but I appreciate what he's done for
free speech.
Free speech. So I'm just saying to people, don't let the blinders take over. Donald Trump, I believe we can trust. Past that, I'm struggling to give you names of who we can trust.
Okay, well, I'm encouraged to hear that we can trust Donald Trump to be against the climate
because he's been shot at, because he's been assassination attempts, because he's been FBI raids, because he's been threatened with jail. I truly believe the man's sincere. You can see it in the change in his behavior. He seems like he's matured and grown up. He's not the same Donald Trump as even 6 months ago. He just seems so commanding and presidential. It's like, wow. I mean, I like this new Donald Trump.
Yeah. And so where, this climate hysteria.
Sorry, I got off track on a lot of different topics there. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So, you get this climate brainwashing that's happened. They start with our youth. Do you have any recommendations or anything we can do about it? Because, everybody I know who's like under the age of 30 is like, oh, yeah, climate change, we got to do something about it. You hear from everybody.
Yes. And that go back to his 3 top climate energy picks. Now you have your liberal professor, your second grade teacher. Well, even Trump's nominees say climate's a problem that needs a global solution, and they're not deniers. So of course we're going to teach the kids, even the Trump. That's what I'm saying. It's so corrosive to have these guys at the top of their game, terrified to stand up to the climate narrative. Anyway, having said all that, with kids, they're indoctrinated from kindergarten through college. And it's unbelievable, insidious. It's permeated in the textbooks. It's permeated in all the Hollywood and the videos. It's permeated in the whole teen online culture. Although there's been a great rise in recent skepticism on Instagram and these different social media platforms that TikTok and other things that kids can watch. So I think it's shown that when you have a strong leader like Donald Trump, first of all, that calls it climate change scam and says it was invented to benefit China and we have all this fun, it has a huge impact. There was this whole idea that it's been overstated, first of all, the impact of all that propaganda, because at some point you just tune it out. The exit polling showed that the climate youth that they were expecting to show up didn't show up for Kamala Harris. And that actually among that age group, it split pretty evenly. So there is no brainwashed, at least let me rephrase it. The extent of the brainwashed youth movement was nowhere near as much as we had feared or the other side had hoped, because youth broke. And I think a lot of that was the UFC and Dana White and Joe Rogan getting a lot of the males, young men involved in the campaign. So it's a great question. And I think parents, that's why I wrote the book, Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. It's an A to Z compendium. And I actually have a whole chapter devoted to that. But there's also groups out there now that are doing alternative textbooks, or I shouldn't say textbook. They're alternative curriculum for parents, particularly for private school, homeschool, that stuff. It's not going to fly in almost every public school. Teachers unions aren't going to allow anything that challenges that. I've testified at the Common Core curriculums in different states, and most notably West Virginia, where they were going to say there's no dissent. We actually had small victories there, where the state of West Virginia would only allow core curriculum to teach certain things and ban some other stuff they considered propaganda. So the biggest thing is parents have to be engaged in the education of their kids and scour those textbooks, because they're usually just absolute drivel.
Yeah, and I've heard you recommend, the best thing to do is take them out of the public schools.
If you can, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. I mean, not everyone can afford private school. It's not practical always to do homeschooling. But it's
Well, I don't let anybody off that easy. No, my
Well, I'm
wife
just
came
saying,
from
I'm not,
Japan. She didn't
yes.
even speak English. We homeschooled all three of our kids. Not nearly as hard. You have no excuse to put your kids in the government
Yes.
schools. I'm sorry, I don't let anyone get by with that.
Agree, yes.
And Mr. Morano, I appreciate the fact that you've given us a yardstick. How can we judge this? And a stick. We need a yardstick and we need a stick, and we need to keep these people in line. It's a scam. It's hysteria. It's communism dressed up in green. That's all.
Yes.
And the fact that we have a president that's willing to say that, hopefully that's a step in the right direction, that we finally have some bureaucrats who he can drag along with him. And we appreciate you helping us understand how to recognize if what's happening is real or not.
Well, let me just say, final thing is, I wrote the book, The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. That was just 2 years ago, just came out. And the gist of it is, this is the global community trying to ration our energy, ration our food production. They're coming after particularly meat, high yield agriculture. They want to ration it, raise the price due to climate. And John Kerry said it was coming here to the U.S. Donald Trump stopped that. And then also our freedom of movement, France banning short haul flights, CNN proposing carbon passports for our travel, the ban on gas powered cars. This was the Great Reset: food, transportation, energy, and of course our free speech. Donald Trump's election, it could be the most consequential election in our lifetimes, surpassing Ronald Reagan or whatever if you're on the left, maybe you were enamored with Bill Clinton or Obama. This is huge because we are fighting back on all of those fronts, particularly just free speech alone and national sovereignty. And it's unbelievable. I expect a cultural change. And that's what was disappointing about the three picks not standing up on climate. But within a couple years, look at the 1970s versus 1980s and what Reagan was able to usher in. I think we're seeing the end of transgender cult, the critical race theory, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and hopefully the climate as well. Culturally, I mean, I'm watching Saturday Night Live is doing unbelievable skits, making fun. They're doing lesbian jokes about Rachel Maddow. I mean, I don't think you would have seen that a month ago. It's or 2 months ago. It's shocking stuff. That's what I mean by cultural stuff. We might actually return to a culture that appreciates free speech, and cancel culture can go away. So this is just huge. That's all I can say is Donald Trump's presidency. Let's just hope he continues the success and the pace at which he's been going. It's phenomenal.
Well, thank you for mentioning The Great Reset. I highly recommend that book to everybody. You've got quite a few books that really point to this issue of climate change hysteria, man-made climate change, and just how important it is for our listeners who are not aware of this. This is serious stuff. You know, they want to control the steak dinner you have down in Florida if you want to go on vacation. All of these things, they're a totalitarian worldview, and they want to control our lives, and all in the name of climate change, man-made climate change that is based on a lot of fake science. Mark, I'd love to have you on again sometime in the future. We can go into a little bit more detail on the science behind all of this, but I thought it was important for our listeners to find out just how serious this issue is and how important it is to fight climate change. And Mark, you just don't know how greatly I appreciate what you've done. You're a tireless warrior for this, and now you've come onto our show, shared with our audience, what's going on, and for decades now you've been fighting this fake science of man-made climate change. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Doug. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. We'll keep in touch, Mr. Morano. God bless you.
All right. I'd love to come back. Thanks.
All righty. So for Marc Morano and my co-host Doug McBurney, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.